let me introduce our guest speaker today. It's Gil Barros. Gil is from Madison, Wisconsin. He's the technical counselor there for Chapter 93 of EAA. And I looked up, met Gil at the get-together at Stein's back in September, just briefly, and I didn't even know too much about this big trip that he made down to Brazil, which is just mind-boggling to me. But Gil has a 9A that he built a few years ago. I saw it there. It was one of our best RVs that we awarded. It was a beautiful airplane, really cool paint job. You'll have to tell us about that paint job. And it's a very well-equipped airplane. Gil is an IT guy. He does software stuff that I don't understand. So he doesn't have to explain that either. But he's also the proprietor of a very popular YouTube channel, Build Fly Go. It's got zillions of great videos in there. I've looked at a few of them. So after the fact, certainly feel free to jump on there. So I'm going to hand it over to Gil. I'll just sit back and relax and let him do all the work. So Gil, you are in the pilot and command seat. Away you go.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm assuming, yeah. All right. Yeah, so hi, I'm Gil Barros. I currently live in Madison. I actually grew up in Rio, not far from where that airport is. I moved to the US in '98, and I've been here since. And the story, like one of the stories behind aviation for me was looking at this picture. So this is this airport is the downtown airport in Rio. Rio has two major airports. It's this one, which is the sort of domestic downtown airport. And then there's the big international one, which as in a lot of towns is, an hour out of town-ish, roughly. But if you look ahead, basically just off the end of this runway, that is the Sugarloaf Mountain, which you might remember from 007 with Jaws and like him on the cable cars, and he like bit the cable for the cable cars. So, so you can't quite see a cable car on that. But at the top of that, it's a very common tourist destination, but it's also like a really nice, like a lot of locals will go there because it's a nice hike. You can't hike up to the very top one, but there's two stops on this. So you can hike to the sort of the first stop before you get to the top stop. And the cool thing here is at the top, there's this beautiful like overlook, right, where you can look at town and you can look at this airport. And this airport has, you need to train for a special procedure to land here, of course. But taking off in this direction, the takeoff procedure is straight ahead, immediate left turn when able, because you don't want to go over the hills. So they basically want you to turn left. So if you're standing up there or sitting up there with a nice cold beer, you can watch airplanes taking off directly at you all day long. And this is just one of those things that I did as a kid, right? It's just you sit up there, maybe not the beer, you sit up there and you just watch airplanes taking off. And Rio is a big town, and this is the big domestic downtown airport. And there's probably a 737 landing here every 30 seconds. So it's nonstop traffic. So anyway, so I went to Brazil. So let's see what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about 5 things on this in this talk. And I have a ton of detail that I can go into in all of these. So if you have questions, interrupt me. Type in the chat. I'm watching the chat if you have a question, and I'll answer you, or I'll sort of defer it to a little later where it might be answered. But usually what people want to hear about in a trip like this, from Madison all the way to Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro is in sort of the southeast corner of Brazil. So you cross the entire US and you're maybe a third of the way there. It's really sort of how do you plan for a trip like this, right? Is there like crazy paperwork, any special equipment that you might need? We're going to look at a lot of pictures for sure. And of course, I made a nice patch for the trip. So planning, this was the route. This is actually the route we took. I did update it once we got back so that I could have the updated route. But I mean, going through the US is easy, right? I mean, we're all used to doing this. especially experimental aviation people, people with RVs, right? Like it's getting to Florida is what, like a 5-hour trip, 6-hour trip, something like that. So you can get there in a day. You can get to most of the US in a day in an RV. But as soon as you get out, things are a little different, right? Like it's in a trip like this, you're going through half a dozen countries, right? Each of there's different sets of islands that are different countries, and then you get to Latin America and you're going through Guyana and all this kind of stuff. And it's all different. The procedures are all different. The expectations are all different. The rules are different in some cases. So the big thing that we, wasn't obvious to me at the time, but, quickly became obvious was all of these people, like all of these aviation people are excited to talk to you, right? Like we're aviation people, like we're excited to talk about airplanes, right? Like we want to talk about people's trips. We want to talk about, where you went and how it was different and how it wasn't. And that's the case everywhere. So the people in Grenada, in the Eastern Caribbean, are just as excited to talk about small airplanes as we are. And when they hear about you doing a trip like this, which isn't common, right? Like there's definitely been done many times. I'm definitely not the first, but it's not common. And they're happy to tell you about, how do you fly in Grenada, right? Like, what do you need to do to fly in the Caribbean? And these local experts are key, right? Like just for us, it was a question of like, AOPA has chapters in all sorts of different countries, and we just posted on the Facebook group for AOPA Brazil, and suddenly a dozen people are, giving us contact information and telling us, oh, you should stop at this airport, you stop at that airport. But yeah, it's fun. There's a ton of resources out there. AOPA, again, has a nice little guidebook on flying in the Caribbean. They're about this thick, so get the online version. You can download it to your tablet, easy enough. The Civil Aviation Authority for each country, the FAA, usually are fairly easy to work with. They're usually very interested in talking to you and will give you all the information you need. Every so often they're not. Sometimes they just don't return your phone calls, and then again, reach out to your local experts and they'll help you out. It was, I think, Antigua just never returned our phone calls. We showed up, it was fine. There's going to be a lot of forms, mostly general declarations. Every airport, every new country that you fly into wants effectively the same GenDec form, general declaration form, which just says who's in the airplane, what are you carrying, where are you going, where did you come from. Very basically the same format. We actually went to the local FedEx Kinko store and had like 100 of them printed, and then like sticky attached, how you like put the little glue on the end of it so you can tear them off. So we would just show up with a stack of them, and they were mostly pre-filled out with the N number and our names and things like that. Easy. When we got to the Bahamas, we get to Stella Maris and go into the immigration, and she saw the stack of forms I had. She's like, do you have extras? Can you leave some here? We're always running out. And it's like, yes, of course. Just you leave extra customs forms with the custom people. Checklists for everything. We did have little laminated checklists for, we just landed and taxied. We have just closed the airplane and we're walking to the cab or to the terminal. For things like, did you lock the airplane? Did you grab the cameras off of the plane, right? Like the little GoPros and whatever that we had on the plane. Did you grab them because you want to charge them and you want to download the videos? Things like that. Things not to forget. Like when we get to the hotel, you want to make sure we didn't bring enough chargers to charge everything at once because we were very weight limited. So it's a make sure that you charge this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing. But yeah, and then fuel, I did say check on fuel availability 3 times because it's not like the US where you can just look in Garmin Pilot in my case and see how much fuel costs, and there's going to be fuel there most likely. Most of the places down there, you sort of have to call around and find out if there's fuel and what the phone number is for the fuel place and things like that. And when you call and you ask them, do you have avgas, you have 100 low lead, we're going to come in tomorrow and I'm going to need about 30 gallons, are you going to have it? listen to their tone of voice. There was one airport in Brazil that I do have the benefit of speaking Portuguese, where I called and I asked, do you have fuel? And the guy said, yeah, we do. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, we'll see you tomorrow. And I hang up. And I just sort of like, as soon as I hang up, I stop and I go, he didn't really sound confident at all about that. And I call back and I was like, so I just called and you said you have fuel. How much fuel do you have? It's like, I have about 100 gallons. Oh, if he only has 100 gallons the day before, all you need is like a twin Cessna landing and he's out of fuel, right? Like it's, so, pay attention, check on the fuel. One of the things we did as well, again, it's sort of a benefit of, I know Brazil, right? Like I grew up, the picture on the top right is actually the view out my bedroom window as a kid. So I know the area. I had never flown there as a pilot. I became a pilot in the US. But we just definitely took the advantage of Thanksgiving the year before we flew down, and I actually took a case of oil and a filter and a torque wrench, and I left it there because I was going to do an oil change when we got there. And we also picked our sort of airport that we were going to stay at while in Rio. And the two main options were the one on the bottom left and the one on the bottom right. The one on the bottom left is a busy general aviation-ish / executive airport, a little outside of town. Very, very, very nice. We talked to one of the big hangar, like all of these are big FBO / hangar rental places. And we talked to a couple and they were interested in having us and no issues. It was going to be about $50 US a night for hangar fees. There were no tie downs. It was definitely hangar fees, and the landing fees there I think were about $75 per landing, which is high, but honestly it's not exorbitant for a trip like this. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So that was the original intended airport. And then my mom, who lives there, my mother lives there, says, well, I've got this friend who is in a flying club that's outside of town. It's a little far, but they really want to, they really want you to come out and see it. And, they offered for you to stay there. And it was like, oh, sure, let's go look, right? It's pretty far. It's about an hour and a half out of town. An hour and a half outside of town in Rio is probably 40 miles because you're mostly driving through traffic jams and, it's not a pleasant hour and a half out of town. But we get there and this place is a little piece of heaven. I have no better way of saying it. We get there and there's a bunch of, there's airport people just hanging out, right? There's a little restaurant, they're hanging out, they're, having lunch, or I think it was lunch when we got there, having lunch and chatting, and we show up and the guy who had invited us over is there, and we chatting and he's showing us the hangars, and he said, he's like, look, we're not going to charge you anything for being here. We'd love to have you, right? Like you can stay as long as you want. We're going to put you in a hangar. Just come on out. And I was like, yeah, this is really nice. It's far though. And it's like, well, why don't you go flying and have a look around? And he looks at me and he's like, you've flown a high wing Cessna, right? And I said, yeah, I've got a couple $100 in 172s. And it's like, okay, here. And he sort of tosses me the keys. And he's like, it's the Tecnam, PP something. It's in the hangar. Just have the guys pull them out and just go for a flight. And I was like, I have no Tecnam time. He's like, it's like flying a 150. You'll be fine. and I was like, I started to make a face. And I was like, oh, this is scary, right? Like, is this legal? Are we okay? And one of the other guys sitting there is like, oh, I'll go with you. So the two of us just go up and we just fly around the islands and just have a good time. And I come back and it's just, yes, we are definitely staying here. It's phenomenal. So we'll get back to that. Really quick on permits, forms, and fees and things like that. Honestly, this is not that hard. Figure out what the requirements for the forms are. It's going to be on the CAA or the FAA, the equivalent FAA's website, right? So for the US, to leave the US, you file an EAPIS, right? Which is you just go to the Customs and Border Protection site. It's the one on the bottom right here. You log in, you have to buy the sticker for the year, and you fill out the form and you submit it, and you get an email. That's it. And then you need a flight plan to cross the border, the air border, the ADIS, and the transponder code, and that's pretty much it. No complications. In the Bahamas, it's pretty much the same thing. You arrive, there's nothing like this, but you arrive and you land and you just fill out some paperwork. You give them a couple of bucks. I think it's like 20-30 bucks to get the Bahamas paperwork done, and they stamp your form, and then you're sort of free, right? Like it's similar to the US, in which you're sort of free and you can just go fly around. We did file flight plans for every single leg of this trip, mostly because there was a good bit of over water and over Amazon going on. But Bahamas was very, very, very easy, and I recommend that everybody needs to do Bahamas. Once you get to the Eastern Caribbean, it's a little more complicated, not that bad. They have an EAPIS-like thing. They call it CARICOM EAPIS. We filled that out every single time. We did talk to people who were at had just landed at the airport, also international, who were supposed to have filled these out, and they said they never do, and nobody ever asks any questions, and it's fine. It's free. It takes 2 minutes to fill out the form, right? I'd rather minimize possible complications when you get there. Guyana and Brazil were a little more complicated. They wanted us to fill out forms ahead of time and request approval. It was actually pretty easy. The Brazil thing was all online. You just filled it out, hit submit, and 2 days later you got an email saying you're all good. One thing to keep in mind here is that all of these countries are going to want to see that your insurance covers liability at a minimum in their country. And most of our insurance policies in the US will cover the Bahamas. Some of them will cover Eastern Caribbean, but that's about it. Unless you have specifically asked for it, none of them will cover Latin America at all. Mexico probably will, but none of like Southern Latin America. So that was sort of finicky for us to get that. Only one underwriter was willing to cover Brazil. And that was sort of expensive. I want to say it was the numbers might be off. I want to say it was $1,000 to get Brazil coverage in addition to my regular coverage, and it was a one-time, like they said, like this is not year-round coverage. This is a one-trip Brazil coverage for $1,000. It was worth it. But here we go. So this is Guyana, right? So we've made it through most of the Caribbean. This is Guyana. We're up in the tower. You can see the airplane. They just parked us on a taxiway because they didn't have any small airplanes, right? The smallest one was whatever this is over here. Yeah, they just parked us there and then had us fill out all of our paperwork and go up to the tower to fill out the flight plan. And that was it. The gentleman, that's Mary on the very left there, my wife, who came with me, by us, me and the airplane. I forgot the name of this gentleman. He was the marshal, right, that positioned us. And one of the big things that we were told is pretty much nowhere do you need handling. Right? Like you don't want to pay the FBO to do stuff for you. It's not worth it. It's expensive. And they're not going to do anything that you couldn't do, with an extra 10 minutes of your time and just knowing where to go. Knowing where to go is key. I'll get to that. Except for Guyana. They said in Guyana, what's going to happen is there's no FBO, but you're going to land. And this dude in a ball cap and reflective vest is going to marshal your airplane. And then he's going to say, do you want help? And you're going to say yes. You're not going to say, oh no, I think I'm going to do this by myself. You're going to say yes to this gentleman. And he walked us from door to door to door to door to door, back to the first door, to the third door, to the first door again, to the second door. We were there for easily an hour, just walking back and forth between different offices and paying $2 here and $7 here. And, we get receipts for everything, right? Like all of this was above board. It was just that, like, You paid the bill for being parked on the taxiway for a half hour, and that was $2. And you paid the bill for landing, and that's a different department, and that was, you know, $10. And you paid the bill for this, and that was this, and you paid, and it was just one after another. And at the end of the day, we come back, and I shake his hand, and I say, "Thank you very much. What do I owe you?" And he says, "Usually people come in here and they give me $100." And I say, "Oh no, I've been told that usually people come in here and they give you $50." Because that's what I was told, right? The person who told me says, "No, you just give him $50 each time, and he's going to ask you for 100, but he'll take 50." And he laughs and he says, you've been sent here by someone, right?" And it's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And I said, "Tell you what, I'm going to be here twice. On the way back, I'll give you $60 each time." And he's like, "Yes." And he was happy, and I was happy, and I knew he was going to be there and help us out. Great guy, very, very helpful. I did get a quick question. Did I file for sequential days in case of poor weather? So when in the Caribbean, I filed pretty much immediately right before a flight. So I already knew what the weather was and what we were going to do and things like that. So, you know, you call, you have to do it on the phone every time. And you call and you get a weather briefing, which you already knew because you have the internet. And you give them all of your information, and then you file your flight plan, and you take off, and you call Miami radio or whatever the radio station is, and activate your flight plan after takeoff, because there's no towers on any of the little airports that we stayed at, except for some of these. And you keep going. In Brazil, it was a little different, and we'll get to that once we get to Brazil. So real quick on equipments and spares and things like that. So one of the things that we did before this trip was we went to at AirVenture the year before the trip. I went to the Federal Pavilion and I talked to the search and rescue people that were there. Right, there was a man and a woman in, you know, fatigues or whatever their outfit was, and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this trip, and we're going to fly to like through the Caribbean." And we weren't sure at this point yet. It was like, I want to fly either through the Caribbean or through sort of Central America, Mexico and Panama and all that kind of stuff to go to Brazil. And the first thing they said was, fly through the Caribbean. Yes, it's water, but if you ditch in the water in the Caribbean and you did this right, you're going to be a 10-minute swim from shore, for one. But most importantly, the US Coast Guard is patrolling most of those Caribbean waters anyway. So you're going to be picked up, as long as you're sort of Bahamas area, right? Like, you're going to be picked up by the US Coast Guard, and they're going to show up. You know, you're not going to have time to inflate your your raft, and they're going to be there. Exaggeration, of course. And that was pretty cool. And the other thing he said was, you want to minimize your time over the Amazon as much as possible, because for one, when you ditch in the Amazon, those trees that you're seeing, the sort of lawn of trees, and you'll see some pictures of these, they look, you know, like normal trees, right? When you're up there. But down low, these trees are like, the trunks are, you know, 10 feet in diameter, and they're 150 feet tall, right? Like, these are not normal trees. These are big trees. So when you ditch, you can't ditch in the forest. You have to ditch in a clearing, which is going to be a river, which is going to be worse than hitting water for like staying upside down and not tumbling the airplane, right? Because it's full of rocks and like curves and jags and things like that. And the other thing they said was, getting you out of there is going to be complicated, right? Because there's no way to get there, right? So they're going to have to send a helicopter from somewhere, and you're in the middle of the Amazon, and it's not terribly populated, so it's a lot more complicated. So they said, minimize your time with the Amazon. Don't go through the Central America, because there's not that many airports and things like that, and go through over the water, which was fine. Yes, twice we were outside glide range of land, only twice. Once directly after takeoff from Florida, there's like a 3-minute stretch there where you're not within glide range of land. And then when we crossed from Grenada into Guyana, and that is the reason we had a raft, which we'll talk about in just a minute. That is real water, right? Like that's not warm Caribbean, beautiful waters. That's like real ocean water. And it's outside the sort of the coverage area of U.S. Search and rescue. It's sort of Guyana, Venezuela, and Trinidad and Tobago search and rescue area, and they're not as well equipped. We'll be honest, not as well equipped. So talking about equipment, the other thing that we learned was you want them to know where you are if you ditch, right? Like the main thing is you want them to know where to find you. And they said, you're gonna be in the water, or you're gonna like come out of the air, not on an airport. Turn on your ELT immediately. Just hit your ELT. Nobody's gonna care, right? Like if your engine comes back and you manage to land at an airport, nobody's gonna be upset at you that you did that. So just do it. And the other thing they said was have each person, especially in the water, have each person wearing their life jacket. Not the life jacket in the back of the plane. Wear it. The guideline was, if you hit the water, you're going to be more soaked in adrenaline than you are in actual water, and you're not going to remember where anything is. Everything's going to be thrown about the airplane, and you're going to be trying to get out of the airplane, not grab something. So anything that you're not wearing that is not in a closed pocket or attached to you by a line or something, don't expect to have it, right? So count only on things that are in your pockets. And that's where the personal locator beacons come in. Is you want one in the pocket of each person in that airplane, which granted is easier for us to swallow with 2 people in the airplane as opposed to 6. But it was we don't want to be in a situation where you're in the water and people have been separated and only one person gets found, and it's the person who has the PLB, right? Everybody has the PLB. We also had a Garmin Inreach, the little orange thing up here, which is just a satellite messenger and tracker. It's similar to a Spot. You might have heard of a Spot, but the Garmin Inreach is sort of the more modern version of that. And you can either type out a message on the device, or you can use an app on your phone and just use the keyboard on your phone. That was invaluable on the trip because I managed to send text messages to people asking for weather reports. Like we're halfway to some airport in the middle of the Amazon, and like you did all of your forecasting and all this stuff ahead of time, of course, but I still want to know what the winds are, right? Before I get there, I still want to know that things are as expected while I still have the chance to divert and go somewhere else. So I would just text one of our local contacts was an airline pilot, or is an airline pilot, and he said, no, that's my week off, and text me and I will respond and I will give you all of the information you need. And he was phenomenal. There's a picture of him at the end. He was phenomenal. I would just send him text messages and I would ask him for, like, can you give me a METAR and a TAF for this airport? And 5 minutes later, I'd have a METAR and a TAF for this airport. We're in the air, right? We're at 10,000 feet and we would get that. So phenomenal. And this goes through the Iridium network, I think. So you need a subscription, and Garmin was very, very nice, and they paid for the subscription for us. So we had no fees. I think the unlimited subscription on this thing is $60 a month. And Garmin paid for that. Thank you, Garmin. But even if you don't have Garmin paying for your subscription, it's still very, very affordable for a trip like that. We still have it, like it's in the plane, it's in that mount, it never leaves the plane. And I have the base subscription, which is like $12 a month or something, and it gives you some number of messages, which is enough. Sorry, I'm rabbit holing, I tend to do that. So not a lot of supplies and tools. And the reason was we weren't going anywhere that I couldn't get FedEx overnight. This was what I was looking at, right? It's like, okay, so in the worst case, I have a flat, right? And I use the tire plug kit. I have tubeless tires, and I use the tire plug kit to patch it so that I can get to a slightly bigger town. And then I have, aircraft spruce overnight me a tire, right? and if I need tools, which I probably won't because I had some of them, well, I might need a couple of tools in that case. I would just order them from Spruce and they would ship them to me. So in that sense, I managed to minimize the weight of tools, right? I did have some basic stuff, right? Like a little ratchet set, the multimeter, what else? Flashlights, a spark plug socket, one extra set of spark plug wires, extra fuel cap, a couple of spark plugs, like things like that, like obvious light things that I might need flying over 100 hours. That's how much the trip ran. But nothing crazy. Didn't have an extra magneto. I've heard people say, oh, I always take an extra magneto with me, and it's like my mags have 800 hours on them, right? Like like I don't need an extra set of magnetos to go with me on a trip, and if I do, I'll just have them shipped, right? Like it's no big deal. Okay, here we go. I don't know if these videos are going to show up well in on the Zoom or not. So one of the things we did, and that we were told to do by the search and rescue guys, was, oh, you should call Oklahoma City and ask them when they're doing their ditch and underwater egress training. And we did. We called the FAA at Oklahoma City and asked, hey, we heard that you guys do ditch and underwater egress training for pilots. And they said, yeah, we have openings on these days. And I said, oh, how much does that cost? And they're like, they're free. And this was a fantastic day in Oklahoma City. We did, you show up, we showed up the day before, and you do a bunch of classroom stuff, and then you do pool stuff. And this is what you do. They put you on the little thing, they flip you upside down, and you have to properly get out of the airplane, or the cage in this case. They also had rafts set up in the pool so that you could figure out how to get in the raft. Getting in a raft is surprisingly hard, right? Because you're in the water, your clothes are soaked, right? They had us wear these jumpsuits. They're soaked, they're heavy. You're wearing an inflated life jacket. And the raft has these thick walls, right? So it's like you have to climb a foot over the thing in those conditions. They weren't running it today, but they also have like a weather system that they can put in this, so they can bring the temperature down to like 40 degrees and have wind going by you. And it's like, thankfully that wasn't going on. But yeah, so we got to do that. We got to do a helicopter pull out in the water. They have a winch. Very cool. Definitely highly recommended. Go do this. It's a ton of fun. The raft that we bought was this one on the left. I purchased a timed out raft online, and I sent it to Winslow to have them overhaul it, and they overhauled it for me. And we took it on the trip. This thing is heavy. It's 30 some pounds. It's pretty big. And it's sort of ungainly to like get in and out of the airplane. And you always want it on top of everything, right? Like in the RV, the baggage compartment's right behind me. So you want it on top of everything else. So anytime you're trying to get anything else out of the back, you have to lift this thing out, and it's heavy. Lift it out, get your stuff, and then put it back in. I'm glad we took it. We no longer had it. We sold it to another RV friend of ours who was going to do a trip to Europe, and he wanted a raft. So we just passed it on to him. And the reason we had a raft on this trip, I don't feel like I need one to go to the Bahamas, to each their own, of course. But it was the crossing from Grenada to Guyana, where we were 30 miles offshore in some points. And that's more time in the water than I want to spend just wearing a life jacket. So in real water, right? In real cold water. So that's what that came in. There's a question on, do we need different cell phone coverages to get coverage outside the US? We use Google Fi for our cell phone coverage, and it has international coverage, so it worked everywhere. I know Verizon as well because we do have Verizon on one of our phones, and it's the same thing. You just pay an extra, I think it like on Verizon, it's like $10 a day or something like that for your plan to work, in other countries. So not a big deal, easy enough to set up. It just works. So let's get to the fun parts, the actual flying. Madison to Florida is easy, right? Like we've all, maybe not from Madison, but many of us have gone to Sun and Fun or to somewhere warm before. Easy, right? It's just time in an airplane, looking at ADS-B weather in the airplane, right? Like, you know what's going on. And this is really sort of the last chance to wing it. Everything from here onwards, we had a flight plan for, and like we were going from point A to point B. We're like not dilly-dallying too much, right? Like we have a destination, right? We're trying to enjoy it, but we have a destination. And one of the things that I always tell people that I'm flying with is if you see something when you're flying and you want to go look at it and it's in sort of funny airspace or like it's a different airport or whatever, you just ask, right? Like you just go. So we're flying down the Florida coast and I'm sort of looking at the chart. The airplane is fairly well equipped. It's a G3X system. So I'm like looking at the chart on the plane. And I was like, oh, this is all military. Oh, this is all military airspace. Here's the Cape Canaveral. And the little airport at the Kennedy Space Center has a tower. And I'm talking to Miami Center or like Tampa or something like that. I don't remember who it was. And I was like, hey, can I go do a touch and go over there? And it's like, 689 Room Victor, contact, Kennedy Space Center tower on blah, 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 blah. I was like, oh, what's going on here? And I called him, and this guy probably has the coolest ATC job in the world, right? Like it's the ATC guy who runs the Space Shuttle Landing Center tower. And and I call him, I don't remember what the tower is called. I don't think it was the Kennedy Space Center tower. Cape Canaveral Tower, 689 Room Victor. We're just 10 miles northwest of you. Any chance for a touch and go? And the control is like, so sorry, no touch and goes today. There's an Antonov on the end of the runway, but you can do a low pass, just sort of like jog to the right before you fly over the Antonov, just so you don't like startle them. And I was like, okay. So, like we fly down the runway, right? Like you can see the building on the right here is where they like put together the space shuttle. Humongous runway, of course. And there's an Antonov unloading spaceship parts on the runway. How often do you get to A, see that, or B, even get to say it, right? Like there's an Antonov unloading spaceship parts over there. So we flew down the runway and sort of jogged to the right so that we wouldn't bother them as they unloaded spaceship parts. And come around, I was like, hey, can I do that again? And they're like, yeah, sure. Do it all day long. So we did it again. It was just a phenomenal, right? Just like, oh, there's something fun to see over there. Don't get to do that every day. All right, so we overnighted in the Fort Lauderdale area, and then we crossed the next morning to the Bahamas in the Caribbean. This was incredibly easy. You fill out your EAPIS, that's it. You have a flight plan, you take off. We took off from Fort Lauderdale Executive, so we already had our transponder code when we took off. The people in the Bahamas, everybody wants you there, right? Like they're nice, they're pleasant. They want you to spend your tourist dollars there. They want to talk to you about airplanes. The fuel is pretty reliable. We called ahead and they're like, yeah, no, we haven't, like the airports that we called ahead, they're like, no, we've never had issues with fuel. We have it, come on by. And sure enough, we show up and there's like multiple fuel trucks, right? It's no big deal. It was pretty cheap. We stopped in Stella Maris on our way there. And I think the landing fee was $2. And then the customs processing stuff, right? Because we were going into the Bahamas at that point, was like $40 or something like that for the entire trip. Very, very easy to do it. Totally worth it. Not far from here. The first stop in the Bahamas from Florida, from the Florida coast, I think is Bimini, and it's like 30 miles, right? It's nothing. Totally worth doing. I have been, unfortunately with COVID, it's been delayed over and over, but we have been planning on doing a trip out there and just telling everybody we know, okay, you have an airplane, come with us. Let's go to the Bahamas. Let's go spend a week, island hopping. So hopefully next year, we'll see. And one of the things that Puerto Rico is not that far. It's not a one shot, at least for me, it's not a one shot, right? Like our one shot was from Fort Lauderdale Executive to Stella Maris, which is the bottom left over here. And then from Stella Maris, we did non-stop Stella Maris to Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic, which is just a 5-minute flight from Puerto Rico. We decided to stay a few days in Punta Cana only because we were, we had just stopped in the Stella Maris, and we were thinking, oh, it would be nice to stay somewhere warm and sunny for a couple of days. So why not? And we were a bit ahead of schedule as well. So the only place that really was strict about the time on the entry permit was Brazil. They gave us a window of like, you have to land within these 3 days. And we were early, so we decided to, well, let's just kill a bit of time. So we stayed at a nice little resort in the Dominican Republic. But flying in the Caribbean is this, right? It's these gorgeous blue waters, and that's the extent of the clouds that we saw the entire time we were there. A little bit of rain here and there, but this was it, right? It's gorgeous, it's warm, it's sandy, it's easy to get to from here. If you look at the little map on the left side, there's Fort Lauderdale, and I think that's South Bimini, which is Mike Yankee Bravo Sierra. Gulf Foxtrot is one of the bigger airports. Don't go there. It's big and populated. South Bimini is nice, but keep going, right? Like South Bimini is not far. If you look at the scale, that's 12 miles. So let's call that maybe 40 miles to South Bimini. Easy enough to do. So Puerto Rico, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous Puerto Rico. That's top left is Puerto Rico. The mid top is Puerto Rico as well. That's the downtown airport in Puerto Rico, right in the middle of the shot right there over the bay. And I think I might have a picture of this later. So we're landing, we're on short final to Puerto Rico, and Tahina Tower, and it's just normal American airport, right? It's the US over there. And there's a cruise ship that's exiting the sort of the Bay Canal area here, right? The ocean's over here, and this is like Bay area. There's a cruise ship coming this way, and we're landing this way, and we're on glide slope, like we're on what we should be doing. And I talked to Tower, and it's like, hey, there's a cruise ship that's going to pass awfully close to us. And he's like, no, you're on glide slope, you're fine. And I was like, are you sure? I swear I could have high-fived people in their balconies on the cruise ship as we went by. It was so close, but it was like, everything is fine. And after we landed, I asked him again, it's like, are we okay? And he's like, yeah, no, you're perfectly fine. You're within proper separation. And I was like, okay. It was fun. Top right is Punta Cana, very nice little airport with a nice sort of executive SBO area. A bit pricey. I think we paid $100 for 2 nights parking and entry and things like that. A bit pricey, not crazy, but pricey. You'll notice the keen-eyed ones amongst you might notice that the airplane has big white N numbers. I don't usually have big white N numbers on that airplane. You'll notice right next to the big white N numbers are little silver N numbers. So the white N numbers are for border crossings. So when you cross the US border, you have to have 12-inch N numbers. So we just had vinyl numbers printed, and we just put them on the plane for the trip. As soon as we got back in the US, we peeled them off. It's easy enough. Bottom left is the view from Punta Cana Resort. It was a rainy day in Punta Cana, a little windy. And bottom right, this is the FBO at Stella Maris. On the right is the sort of the FBO and the sort of the fuel area. They brought a fuel truck out to us. I don't know what this little hut in the middle is. And on the left was Customs and Immigration, where it was bring your kid to work day. So, the customs officers there who had asked me for spare forms, she asked me for spare forms, also had her kid there. It was nice. Continuing on to the Eastern Caribbean, we stopped in the Dominican Republic, Stella Maris, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, because we saw Puerto Rico and we're like, we can't not stop here. So we spent the night in Puerto Rico and explored a little bit, and then Antigua for fuel, and then down to Grenada, which is the top right, is the airport in Grenada. Beautiful, beautiful airport. Sort of, the airport was cheap. The island was sort of pricey, but the airport was dirt cheap. I want to say like the 3 nights we spent there, 2 or 3 nights we spent there, we paid maybe $20 total, including landing and customs and everything for the fees. And it was also surprisingly easy. A lot of the airports that we landed at outside the Bahamas were really set up for FBOs to handle you, and we chose not to use big FBOs because we didn't want to pay the $100 $100-200 a landing for handling fees. So it was a little more complicated to, like, you have to go to this office and this office and this office, things like that, right? And in Grenada, it was easy. It was one office, and the guy there was just like, "Oh, you're that little airplane? Okay." And that was it. Cats, Caribbean cats. So here was the scary bit. This is leaving Grenada into, if you look at the top left, Grenada, and then a couple of fixes, and then into the Guyana downtown airport. We filed IFR for this. We filed IFR for any of the big overwater stuff. So definitely the US to the Caribbean, and then Grenada to Guyana, and then also any over Amazon stuff that was, I also filed IFR for it, just so that you could have a little more attentions. We'll get into that a little bit. So the interesting thing here is, so this, you can't quite see the country line here. This is Venezuela. US aircraft are not allowed in Venezuela. US general aviation aircraft are not allowed in Venezuela. And there are stories of, don't know if they're true or not, but I heard stories of, like, don't veer into their airspace or you will, be greeted by a couple of jets asking you what the heck's going on, which means you have to fly 40 miles offshore to stay outside their airspace. And this was sort of scary, right? Like, this is just, this is real Atlantic Ocean, right? Like, you're not in the Caribbean anymore. Caribbean's over here, right? Like, this is cold waters, with Venezuelan search and rescue people, or Guianan search and rescue people. It's different. It's a different experience than flying in the Bahamas. This is why we had the raft. And this was probably like, for me, the scariest part, right? We were on climb, which is why the fuel line is short of the airport. This is the 45-minute fuel line. It's short of the airport because we're at, like, pitched up climbing and slow. But still, this was not a long flight, right? I think ET is actually to Metak, but anyway, not a long flight. This was maybe a couple of hours at tops. This was our first view of land after we crossed the water, so it was very relaxing. It's you really become in tune with the airplane when you're flying over water like this. Every little hiccup and burble and different noise you're very aware of. I talked to the airline guy who was helping us out, and he says, "You may notice all these things, but the Lycoming has no clue that you're over water. You'll be fine." Yeah, sure enough. And so we landed over here at the Georgetown airport. Departing Georgetown was VFR on the ground, but their radar was broken. Things that don't happen in the US, well, I'm sure they do. Their radar was broken, so they were doing IFR traffic by self-reported vectors from a fix. So all of the airline traffic were calling in with 8 miles at the 120 radial from blah 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 every couple of minutes. So his separation, of course, limits were much higher than they normally are. So we were in this bumpy cloud for maybe 45 minutes because they just couldn't, they didn't have the space to let us leave the cloud. This was probably the only real IMC we had on the entire trip. Not the most pleasant thing in the world to be in this, especially over sort of rainforesty areas where you don't know what's below you, but it's part of the adventure, right? It's so Brazil. We got a ton of media attention. So little did we know, one of the people that we had talked to and was helping us, coordinate airports and like getting fuel and things like that, had mentioned to local news in, oh gosh, what's the name of the town? Boa Vista, thank you. In Boa Vista, Boa Vista was was our airport of entry. In Boa Vista, they mentioned to the local news that this Brazilian guy built an airplane in the United States and is flying back to Brazil with his home-built airplane. So we got a lot of media attention. And in quite a few airports, you'll see a few more. There were news crews and people wanted to interview us, and it was cool. It was nice. It also meant we got a lot of attention from local airports as well, and people, local aviation people who we didn't know, who just saw it on the news and then, found our YouTube channel and then reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to stay here? We'll give you fuel discounts. We'll give you a hangar for the night, right? Like we'll have a big barbecue, it's like things like that," which was really cool. And we did that, right? Like we replied to these messages and we stopped at little airports where people have reached out to us, and like we had a big party with them and we had lunch and dinner, and like we got a hangar for the night, and they found us a place to stay, like phenomenal, like little hotels in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with toucans and parrots and like all sorts of stuff around, right? Like things that you wouldn't get to experience if it hadn't been a random person who said, "This is cool, I want to help them out and we're going to do something fun." It was awesome. Brazil has very, very high airport fees. There is, it's partially because we were doing such very long segments that we wanted to guarantee that we were going to land. If the wind is iffy, the airport's big enough that I could just land on the other runway, kind of thing, right? So we stayed at some bigger airports than we needed to, unless we had a hookup. So the airport fees were fairly high. It was fairly common for us to pay $100 for an overnight landing plus the stay. It was worth it. I really gotta tell you, it was worth it. You got to see beautiful, beautiful things and have fantastic experiences. I am from Brazil. I speak Portuguese, full disclosure, but ATC the entire time was English. They would speak Portuguese to other people. I insisted in speaking English because Mary is also a pilot, right? So Mary's sitting next to me, and like we were doing CRM, so she's listening to the radio, she's running the autopilot, right? Like we're playing this game together. So that way, she knew everything that was going on. So I mentioned the vast green lawn of the Amazon, right? Excuse me, we're at 10,000-ish feet. When we didn't have places to land below us, we flew high, 10,000-12,000 feet. And this is what those trees look like at 10,000 feet, right? These are humongous trees. The only place that you can ditch there is in that river, and you really don't want to. Well, you don't want to anywhere, but you really don't want to ditch in that river. This is Boa Vista. Boa Vista is I don't know what they call it. It's an engineered town. It's a planned town. So the architects decided this is what the town is going to look like, and then they built it, right? So it's got these sort of the nice geometric shapes, and it starts at like the center of town and it ends at the airport. Very, very interesting architecture. And the airport is a shared sort of military / commercial airport. Very little GA. In most of Brazil, very little GA. So there were these super Tucanos taking off on, to do some sortie or something, some training flight. And there's us in the RV, and like all of the Tucano guys are just like slowing down to watch us, right? And it's just like, yeah, that's so cool. Little glimpse of the Amazon River just below us. There's more coming. This was a flying club in Manaus, which is one of the main port towns in the Amazon. There's the big airport off to the far right, which is right, in this case, is north, and the little flying club airport. It's very common there for the small airports to be owned by a flying club. It's not, the flying club is really an organization that owns the airport, that has airplanes that they can rent and you become a member and things like that, right? It's not a flying club like here where it's a flying club that owns one airplane. These flying clubs own the airport and the fuel service and the 8 200 by 100 hangars, right? It's really sort of a flying club in name only. And we stayed there, and no landing fees. Flying clubs were usually either cheap or free. No landing fees, got fuel kind of thing. This is like, it's humid in the Amazon. It was hot and humid over there. So the top left and the rightmost picture is the Amazon. So the Amazon River right south of Manaus is sort of, this is where the Black River and the White River, they're actually called the Black River and the White River, merge, and they actually flow separately down miles of the Amazon before they mix. And it's really interesting. It's exactly like this. It's like, it's black and it's sort of whitish brown, and it's just like flowing right next to each other in the water. Bottom left, Mary does have a pilot's license. I did have to inspect the inside of my eyelids at one point on a flight, and she took care of it. I don't remember which airport this is in the middle, but this was very common for airports in the Amazon. This is a commercial-ish airport in the Amazon. Probably has 2 flights a day kind of thing, and an airliner of some sort. And very common, just how it looks. One of the things about this was how intense the greens were, right? Like on this entire trip, everything was just gorgeous, and just, the picture doesn't do it justice, right? Like the color, like the range of greens that you saw was incredible. It was just beautiful. We also had every so often some weird little airports. So this airport, I don't remember the name of it, but it's we landed there, little beat up runway, but it was fine. I called ahead for fuel, and we landed there. We're the only airplane there. The airport manager was there. The airport manager lives at the airport, and he came out and fueled us up. And I asked him, it's like, so why is this airport here, right? Like, I'm not trying to diminish the existence of this airport, but it seems like it doesn't, like it would be hard to maintain with just me buying fuel. And he said that, oh, I'm on the off season. The high season for them is like a month during whenever, and it's the fishing season in this big popular river. And he says they take reservations 2 years ahead of time for a ramp space for that month. And he says that there's like airplanes stacked on top of each other, like on the ramp all month long. And you have to have an entrance and an exit reservation so that they can properly position you so that you can get out when you're planning on getting out, because you can't taxi around. Like, they're going to have to like move 8 airplanes to get you out. And it was just incredible. It was just like, and they all come here for fishing. And he's like, yep, it's a popular fishing spot. I was like, okay. We did see some big weather, big clouds, and sort of off in the distance. We were very careful. Big clouds. And this was fairly common in the Amazon. One of the things that we're told is, and I didn't believe it. It's one of those, like, stick your finger in the light light socket to learn, right? We're told you fly in the Amazon in the morning only. In the afternoon, you land and you go have a beer. That's it. No flying in the afternoon. And I was like, oh, come on, right? Whatever. No, it turns out that, yeah, it gets hot in the Amazon and it's very humid, and the humidity spikes and it creates these humongous cumulonimbus, starting around noonish. So everybody gets up at 5-6 in the morning, goes flying, does their flying, and they're done at noon. And you sit at your hotel and you have your beer. It took us a couple of days to figure that out, and then we really enjoyed it, because you get up really early, you go flying, and then you have the whole day ahead of you to like explore the Amazon, or like hang out with airport people, have a drink with an umbrella in it, and just have a good time at the pool and things like that. So it was pretty cool once we figured it out. But yeah, big weather. A bit of media attention. There's interviewed quite a few different times, showed up in, like, this is the main paper in Brazil on the top left. So we had like sort of the bottom little chunk on one of the pages. Really, really cool. The picture over here, middle left, is when we were landing in the downtown airport in Rio, which was our big destination, right? Landing in the downtown airport in Rio, apparently one of the film crews had been tracking us, and it was on the national news that night. They have like little Twitter blurbs of what people are saying about that. And this lady is saying, "Good God, you couldn't pay me to get in that," about us in the airplane. It's like, okay, fair enough. Many new friends, people who we didn't know at all before this trip. The couple down here on the bottom center reached out to us, through YouTube. He just sent me a YouTube like comment and said, send me a text message and here's my phone number, and like we'll put you up, we'll get we'll get you a hangar, we'll get you cheap fuel, right? Like it's on your way. And I was like, okay, send him a message. He has an RV6, I believe, with a Subaru engine. And him and his wife just like met us there and just got us a hangar and took us out to dinner that night and found us a nice hotel. And it was just like really, really nice, like everywhere. People were really nice. Top right is the gentleman, the airline pilot, who helped us throughout the entire trip, sending us weather reports and recommendations and calling airports ahead of time for us to like check on fuel and things like that. Top left, a flight instructor who at the little Santa Cruz little airport we stayed at in Rio, that has sort of a weird airspace that's right below military airspace, and like the runway takes off onto into a hill effectively. And we landed, and the next day we come by for the big barbecue celebration, and we're chatting, and I was like, that like I'm really not comfortable here, right? Like it's sort of a weird airspace. And he's like, let's go flying. I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm an instructor here, we're gonna go flying, you're gonna get comfortable. So we just spent the afternoon doing touch and goes and like flying around the islands and getting familiar with the airspace. And I still talk to him. He's a great guy. Everybody was just incredibly helpful. We did have one, okay, I lied before. I said there was one actual IMC. There were two. This one was not planned. So we are flying from, I don't remember exactly the airport was, to Juiz de Fora, which is the airport right before our entry into Rio. And we get there, the forecast was perfect, right? Like no clouds, no other thing. We get there and we're above a layer of clouds and we can't get through. And it's this airport on the bottom right, like in a hill, right? Like, and there's no instrument approaches, there's nothing, right? And we can hear like the students, it's a flight club, and we can hear the students below it in the pattern just having a good time, right? Because it was fine for if you're below the clouds, we were just high above it. And I'm just, we had planned our fuel very well, that we had tons of extra fuel for the airport of destination, plus a diversion, plus 45 minutes. And we're circling over there, and I'm thinking through this, and I'm going, we're not gonna, like, this isn't gonna clear up. We're not gonna land here. We need to figure something out. So our diversion airport was Zona da Mata, which is the one with the instrument approach here. And I call, there's not a tower at Zona da Mata, it's a radio station that coordinates it, a little different from the US. And I called Zona da Mata radio and I said, November 689 Remy Victor, we're over Juiz de Fora. We need to come land at Zona da Mata to wait out the weather and to get fuel, and so that we can keep going. And he's like, you're on a VFR flight plan. And I was like, yes, sir, we are. We need to file a, local IFR and land in there. And that, and he's like, are you equipped and capable? And it's like, yep. All right. Fly the, RNAV runway 26 and report your position as you reach the fixes, because he has no radar. And there's an airliner, that Gull airliner on the bottom left is landing just ahead of us doing the same approach. And I was like, Gull, could you let us know, like, when you break through the break through the weather? And the guy's like, are you the guy who just flew here from the US? Like, yep, that's us. And so we, he flew in and he gave us like weather reports as we went down, and this is us shortly after breaking through on the top left. And yeah, I mean, we're, over 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet below. We landed, at which point I'm a little worried, right? Like I just effectively declared a weather emergency, flew IFR without an IFR flight plan into, I'm thinking I'm going to get in trouble, right? So we taxi up. We were actually just left of the goal. This is as we arrived, just left of the goal. And it's like, okay, Mary, so I'm going to go in and pay my, pay the bill, right? And I don't know what's going to happen. So you stay in the airplane and, I don't know what's up. I might have to pay a big fine. I don't know what's going on. And we land and some guy comes out and he's like, oh, they want to see you in the radio room. It's like, yep, I'm in trouble. Like, okay, Mary stays in the plane. I'll go over to the radio room. And the radio guy's like, thanks for doing that. Like, we had heard like you on the radio, like asking for weather reports from the students in the pattern. And we were worried you were going to try and go break through that. And we're really happy that you came over here instead. And I was like, I'm glad that you're happy. And I paid my $100+ landing fee at that airport. They didn't have avgas. So at this point, I'm like thinking through my fuel, right? Like I check my tanks and it's like, no, we're good. Because I left soon enough that I had over an hour of fuel left, so that the flight from here to here was 15 minutes. So I had over an hour of fuel left, and I'm glad that we left when we did and didn't just circle over there hoping, because we would have landed over here anyway, because this never cleared up. We would have landed in Zona de Mata anyway and been stuck, right? Because they didn't have avgas. But alas, so we decided to land there anyway because we needed fuel and it was the closest airport, and paid an extra $50 in landing fees. But it was nice. It was a good experience. And here we are, finally in Rio. We're getting close to the end here. I know I am over time. Couple of quick fun stories here. So if you look at this is the VFR chart on the top right over here, and little did we know, when I called Rio Control, which is the CTA control frequency in Rio Control is like November 16, Victor, over, blah, 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 VFR to blah, blah, blah. And the control is like, oh, 689 Victor, hold for a message. And some guy comes on, he's like, oh, 9 Victor, we were expecting you. I was like, okay. 9 Victor, cleared direct, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wait, I'm blowing all sorts of airspace, clearing direct. It's Bravo everywhere, right? You're flying over major airports and major restricted areas. And it's like, no, clear direct. And I look at the chart and I was like, you know what? Can we do the scenic route through the beach? And he's like, but you could go direct. Nobody goes direct. I was like, it's my first time. So it's like, all right, direct Tulum, then follow the beach. So we went all the way to the other way and then followed the beach all the way down. Gorgeous, gorgeous views. And then we get to sort of the last little spot before we turn in. And it was like, 9 Victor, just turn right. You can't miss the airport. Have a great week. All right. And this was Clube Céu, which is Céu with Sky. Clube is club. So Sky Club, just outside Rio de Janeiro, an hour and a half drive. A little piece of heaven, one one of the hangars, right? They just put us in a hangar and it's just full of little airplanes. And yeah, these are the hills right off the approach. And it was a phenomenal time. When we land, we get a text message from an unknown number, and it's the control supervisor at Rio Control. He's like, oh, here are pictures that we took of you on our radar screens. And it's like, okay. All right, thank you. And that was really cool, right? So it's like, oh yeah, here's us, and here's Sion, and Sion's over here. Here's the military air base that's right next to the little airport, and it's like, that's really cool. Oil change in the tropics. There was the little flying club also has an A&P that has an A&P shop, on the club, of course. And I asked them, it's like, can I rent some space from you and possibly a couple of tools and just do an oil change? And he's like, you're welcome to anything, please. and he wouldn't accept any money, and I just did an oil change, and you know, a few other pilots coming around is like looking at the engine and distracting us and things like that. Great time. Okay, so we're coming up on the end. So the airport that we like, the destination airport, right, was the Santos Dumont Airport in Rio. It's the downtown airport. And Santos Dumont, Alberto Santos Dumont, is the father of aviation. Is this where you guys disconnect me? So outside the US, and pretty much every country has their claim to, oh, this person flew first. In Brazil, it's Santos Dumont. In France, it's someone else. In Germany, it's someone else, right? Like everywhere has, some person that they claim flew first. In Brazil, it's Santos Dumont. So in every single airport in Brazil, on the wall somewhere, there is a picture of Santos Dumont. So I have a collection of Santos Dumont photographs of pictures of like all the different, they're all different, and it's a blast. It's a fun story. So the airport is right here on the right. Here's the Sugarloaf Mountain. I am in the bay. Christ the Redeemer statue, which you might remember from, I don't know, something in Rio, is directly ahead of us, directly in the middle of the shot. And at this point, there are no, like, there's no GA at this airport, right? This is a busy commercial airport. This is like, I don't know, landing at O'Hare, right? Like it's a busy airport. And so, we had a flight plan, of course, to go there. And, like we take off, and of course, as soon as I call center, they're like, "Oh, we're expecting you," and like we fly down the coast and then into the bay. Right, the ocean's over here. The coast. I'm sorry, I'm pointing at things. The ocean is far left. The coast is sort of the line of mountains on the left, and we fly into the bay. And I'm talking to Central Mulcaller. And Tara's like, "Oh, do you mind doing a few 360s for spacing so that we can like slot you in?" I was like, "I can do 360s here all day long. This is like the prettiest thing I've ever seen." And they laugh, and they're like, "Okay, well, let us know when you're done doing 360s and we'll slot you in." So here we are. It's the cover shot of the album. It was just a phenomenal, absolutely fantastic experience. The sort of the funny building on the right there is the old customs house for when boats would come into Rio, right? Like when everything, like immigrants would come on boats, they would go through the customs house, and then they would be allowed into Brazil, or something like that. They just parked us on a little parking area in the grass there, and then they said, wait for the bus to come get you. And sure enough, they sent a bus to come get us, because that was like the smallest thing, and they don't want you walking on the ramp. And yeah, so we had a bus to ourselves, which is usually one of the buses that like loads airplanes. This was sort of a small bus, but yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Fantastic, absolutely phenomenal, gorgeous. So this is the 1 hour-ish version of this talk, which is one way to Rio de Janeiro. And I don't actually have a return trip talk, but it's very much the same. We flew up the coast instead of through the middle of the country. Let me go back. Not that one, right? So you can see we flew through the middle of the country. On the way back, we flew up the Brazilian coast. And it was another phenomenal experience of, people coming out of the woodwork, wanting to find us a place to stay, and offering, hangars and dinner, and, just wanting to talk airplanes. I think the big takeaway from this trip is, everybody is interested in talking, in helping, right? Like when you do something fun, everybody is there for you. And you have to do it, right? Like it's just such a phenomenal thing, right? Just the Bahamas thing, for example, it's easy, right? Like we do this, right? Like we do flights like this, like all of us, right? You've flown to Oshkosh, you've flown to Sun and Fun, you've flown to, wherever. Fly to the Bahamas. If you've made it to Florida, you're 9/10 of the way there. It's easy, and you should do it, and don't wait. Let me look at the questions real quick. Like, well, don't feel rushed. Hey. Okay. I think that's it. Any other questions? So I do have, there's a link to YouTube here. I have videos of the entire trip. I took time lapse of every single flying minute of that trip, and I narrate over it. I talk about, what we did that day, what was interesting about that flight, what was difficult, if there was something funny about flight planning that, or if, something happened. It's sort of fun, if I don't say so myself. And you can just pick, like I did it. There's one video per day, so you can do the whole thing and just follow along in flight with us. It's a great time. Okay.
Well, great, Gil. Thank you so much. Gosh, this is so informative. I'm all inspired now to go somewhere else other than Red Wing soda. I think we all really appreciate you doing this. This is probably the most informative little talk we've had. And yeah, we can go somewhere in these RVs where you just kind of sometimes don't even think about it. It's even feasible.
Uh-huh.
It was really, really great.
I'll post about flying to the Bahamas. Whenever we start actually figuring out if we're going to do this trip, I'll post about it. And, you should all join us. Get in your airplane and follow us out.
Yeah. Bring a crowd. Gee, that'd be great. We could do that. I don't see any reason why not. Well, again, guys, thanks for showing up. I think we had about 40 people, 41 people I saw. And gosh, it's recorded. And we'll get this on YouTube or on our website so the other folks can see it here in the future. And again, thanks, Gil. What a great adventure. You're a great speaker, great pictures, and what a great adventure you had.
A fun time. We're building an RV-10 and we're flying it to Europe in a couple of years.
That's right. Yeah, we'll head back. We'll head back for sure. That'll be great.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and you'll see me at Oshkosh this year, and possibly Sun and Fun.
Great. Any other comments, guys? You can mute yourself if you want to, and ask one last question before we fold up here. But
there's one in here. What was the biggest surprise? I don't know that it was so much a surprise. So I think one of the biggest things that made this possible, I mean, of course, you have to be able to take a month off of work and be able to afford it. But one of the biggest things that made it possible was not stressing out over things, right? Like I think every day I get stressed out at work about something, I get stressed out about this or the other. On a trip like this, like you get to, like when we entered Brazil and we arrived on a Sunday, and the customs guy wasn't there because it's Sunday. And I asked the passport control person, is like, well, what do I do? And it's like, go to your hotel, come back tomorrow. I was like, but, okay. So we did that. We went to the hotel, right? Like, had a nice night, and came back the next morning, and the customs guy still wasn't there. And the passport control guy was still there, from the day before. And it's like, hey, is he coming? And it's like, oh, let me call. And so he called, and hour or two later, the customs guy shows up, and we show him all of our paperwork, and he says, okay, I don't think I can like it's going to take me a while to figure out your paperwork and stamp your approval to go into the country. You can either wait here, or I can give you a call when it's ready. And I was like, can I go back to the pool? And it's like, yeah, I don't care where you go. So we just went, instead of getting stressed about it and being like, oh my gosh, I need to leave, I was like, I'm just going to go to the pool and we're going to call it a day, right? Like, I'm not flying today. I would rather have a beer and enjoy the warm weather than being stressed about this for the next 2 hours and then rushing out of here, right? It's like, not in a hurry. Choose to have a good time instead.
Right. There's a question there, Gil, from Kevin about experimental airplane.
Yeah. Not really is the answer. You are supposed to get explicit approval from each, according to your paperwork, right? Like, I think our on the back of our airworthiness says, it's not valid for international travel, not an ICAO certificate, blah blah blah. You have to get specific approval from each country before you go in. Some countries have that put together, right? Like the Bahamas, you just it's on their website. You just print out the approval. Most of the places in the Caribbean, when I called the CAA and said, I like I'm supposed to get approval from you guys to do this, and can you like send me a letter or an email or like something saying it's okay for me to fly here? And the person on the phone is like, you're approved, you're good. And I was like, no, like, do I need something in writing in case they ask me when I get there? And it's like, oh man, relax. So the answer was not really. No real issues. I did fly to Mexico last February, about a year ago, and Mexico currently does not allow experimental aircraft into the country. Take that with a grain of salt. It is somewhat up to the comandante of the airport that you do your entry in. We did not have an issue. We called ahead to the airport of entry, and we talked to the office there and said, hey, I'm experimental. I'm going to be in Mexico for 2 weeks. I just need approval to come in. And they're like, yep, you're fine. We can give you a single entry permit. We can't give you the year permit, but we can give you a single entry permit at the airport and you'll be okay. I have heard that it is very dependent on which airport you fly into in Mexico. So call ahead. There's a good Mexico GA flying Facebook group with very helpful people on it. So Mexico is a great destination as well. Any others? Oh, you're muted. Still muted.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay, there we are. Anyway, any other questions, guys? If not, we'll wrap up for our winter meeting. But again, Gil, I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
I still have that 2-inch dam of ice in front of my hangar. I'm stuck here, so I can't. But I can dream. It'll melt someday.
Awesome. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. We're going to sign off. We'll see you guys. Thanks a lot.